San Diego Public Library would like to feature local authors. We encourage, if you are local authors, we encourage you to contact us, and we feature you either here or at or some of our branch libraries. And we're lucky the local authors today was Gabriel Linsky, and the title of the book, and I'm just going to let him go. Thank you so much for your remarks.
Thank you all. Good afternoon. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for the delay in starting. We had some technical difficulties with the projector, but as you see, everything is working fine now. So I think we can get started already. And as you know, the subject of today's talk is we're going to be discussing the Christian teachings that the Catholic Church initially and the Protestant Church after taught through the last 2,000 years, which led to untold misery to Jews everywhere. This was designed to create a special type of mindset, and we will discuss this in more detail. But to start, I would like you to ask yourselves this question. What would it take to get you to travel to a town in a faraway land, drag everyone to a forest nearby, and kill them at point-blank range, one by one, until all were dead? I grappled with this question since I was a teenager. There had to be something beyond Nazi racial propaganda to explain why the Germans hated Jews so much. It turns out that what Hitler said about the Jews simply made sense to his Christian countrymen. When I was a little boy, a friend in school told me that the Jews were the Jews were the killers of Christ. Just like me, Germans had heard all their lives that the Jews were Christ killers and evil. Hitler understood he had to speak to the masses in language that was familiar to them, using religious imagery and terminology that he knew would resonate with the people and that they would easily understand and relate to. Finally comprehending this motivated me to write my book, 6 Million Crucifixions, a book that traces the history of anti-Semitism in Christianity and the role it played in the Holocaust. Maybe you also wondered about this, and hopefully today's talk will help you understand as well. Our story begins shortly after the death of Jesus, when his followers began distancing themselves from mainstream Jews. What began as squabbling between religious sects had snowballed into hatred by the time of the Jewish war with the Roman Empire. That culminated with the destruction and sacking of Jerusalem in the year 70 of the Common Era. Both mainstream Jews and the early Christians began to magnify and create differences between themselves. They did this to show the Romans that Christians were not the same as Jews, and also they did it because it was easier for the pagan Gentiles outside of Judea, that is Israel, to adopt the beliefs of the Christian sect. The Gentiles, of course, did not want to be seen as being associated with the Jews, who were at that time the enemies of the Romans. So most Jews of Judea and Galilee, let alone those who already lived in the diaspora, did not know of Jesus, and most who did not believe that he was the Messiah. To his followers, that could only mean that either Jesus was not the Messiah or the Jews were wrong. The early Christians, unable to accept the former, chose the latter. The early church introduced the theological concept of supersessionism, or also known as replacement theology. In this new theological understanding, Christianity became the new Israel and God's new favorite. Christianity replaced Judaism, which was no longer valid and had lost its place in the world. God abandoned the chosen people, and the destruction of the Temple in Jerusalem and further dispersion in the year 70 of the Common Era was proof of it, or at least was understood to be proof of it. Christians began calling the Christian Bible the New Testament and the Hebrew Bible the Old Testament. And this was used as an example of the new covenant with Christians that replaced the old covenant with the Jews. The images that we see here are the common medieval allegorical figures representing the church and the synagogue. On the left, the church, and the right, the synagogue. Typically, the way these allegorical figures are presented is the church wears a crown, a staff, and is proud, has the chalice representing the Redeemer's blood, while on the right, the synagogue is shown with a bent head, with veiled eyes, with a broken staff, and the tablets of the law dropping from her hands. This was intended to represent the blindness of the Jewish people. Deicide is the accusation that the Jews killed Jesus. Ultimately, this is an amendment to the real charge that was leveled against the Jews, namely, that they refused to accept the new Christian faith. We find the first explicit charge of deicide in one of Bishop St. Benito of Sardis' 2nd century homilies, and I quote, "God has been murdered, the king of Israel has been slain by an Israelite hand." This was a slanderous accusation, as it was the Romans who tortured and executed Jesus as a political subversive. However, in Christian writings and art, the Jews were commonly portrayed as guilty of the scourging and crucifixion. In these medieval illustrations, we see Jews, which are recognizable by their Jewish hats, scourging and bringing Jesus to Pilate, who is also portrayed as a Jew. The accusation of deicide was perhaps the most pernicious teaching in Christianity and brought untold misery to Jews for almost 2 millennia. During the Nazi era, the anti-Semitic propaganda of the period often used religious terminology and imagery that everyone would understand and relate to. We see here a Nazi propaganda poster from the 1930s accusing the Jews of killing Jesus, of ritual murder, of rejecting him, and being an enemy of Christianity. The Nazi portrayal of Judaism as pernicious to the Christian mind and as bent on destroying Christianity was inherited from hundreds of years of Christian teachings. It's important to point out that one of the prerequisites for genocide is that the perpetrators feel that they are acting on self-defense against an implacable foe, and also Nazis always presented the battle against the Jews as one of self-defense against an all-powerful enemy. By the Middle Ages, the original intra-Jewish sect animosity had become full-blown hatred. Christian thinkers produced a new and separate theology that defined itself in part as everything Judaism was not. During this time, Jews were accused of all the ills of the world. They were accused of ritually murdering Christian boys to extract their blood to make Passover bread. They were accused of desecrating the host. They were accused of poisoning wells. And when the Black Plague decimated about a third of the population of Europe in the 14th century, Christians everywhere, who already believed that Jews were poisoning wells and were bent on destroying Christianity, immediately concluded that they were responsible for the Black Plague. In these medieval illustrations, we see Christians taking revenge on Jews by burning them alive for allegedly bringing about the Black Plague. The Catholic Church initially established the Inquisition to target heretics, but it was soon aimed at the Jews as they were increasingly seen as not that much different from heretics. In 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council expressly called upon the secular powers to exterminate all heretics. This provision was the basis for a wave of stake burnings during the Inquisition. In 1257, Pope Alexander IV issued a bull officially identifying usury with heresy and placed it under the jurisdiction of the Inquisition. As Jews were commonly associated with usury, from this point on, the Inquisition would officially brand Jews as heretics. The Inquisition pursued and enforced racial anti-Semitism since the Middle Ages. And as a matter of fact, the Jesuits had in their books anti-Semitism all the way up until 1946, after the Holocaust. The Inquisition we see in this image the Inquisition burning of a heretic alive at the stake, surrounded by Catholic priests, ready to save his soul if he accepted Jesus before he died. Sorry for the few centuries after the Holy Inquisition's tradition of burning Jews alive on stake during the Middle Ages, the SS burned Jewish prisoners alive during World War II. The Germans often locked up Jews in barns and synagogues everywhere along the Eastern Front and burned them alive. This was just one of many exterminationist methods they used. As an SS man testified in reference to the actions of his killing squad in Latvia during the Einsatzgruppen trial in Nuremberg, and I quote, "They brought 8 Jews, men and women, with them. The Latvians guarded the Jews, while Harter and Hauser erected a funeral pyre with their own hands. The Jews were bound, put on the pile alive, drenched with gasoline, and burned." It's important to point out that the extermination of Jews was orchestrated by the Germans, but was carried out with the eagerly offered help of Christian French, Austrian, Slovaks, Croats, Hungarians, Romanians, Ukrainians, Poles, Lithuanians, Latvians, and others. After the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in the year 70 of the Common Era, a new rabbinic movement led to a rich oral tradition of study, commentary, legal teachings, and instruction of the Hebrew Bible. The combination of those oral traditions and subsequent rabbinic interpretations and commentaries is known as the Talmud. After the church had discovered and understood that Jews had gone beyond the teachings of the Hebrew Bible, and that modern Judaism was based on the teachings of the Talmud, it began attacking the Jewish Holy Book. In the church's view, the existence of post-biblical or Talmudic Judaism made no sense, as it no longer served the Augustinian purpose of being witness to the Old Testament legacy that gave birth to the New Testament and Christianity. The Inquisition soon began to investigate the Talmud, and not surprisingly found it to be blasphemous and heretical. Pope Gregory IX was convinced that the Talmud was, and I quote, "the chief cause that holds the Jews obstinate in their perfidy." The church felt that if the Talmud was destroyed, the Jews would see the truth about the fulfillment arguments from the Hebrew Bible. Subsequently, the church invaded Jewish homes and synagogues to confiscate all copies of the Talmud, and in places like Paris and Rome, and burned them in huge bonfires that lasted for days. During Christianity's first 1,000 years, Christians were exposed to intense anti-Semitism in their home texts, in the writings of the church fathers, and clerical sermons. In the Christian Bible, the Jews are presented in the worst possible light. Jews are portrayed as bloodthirsty, hateful, and guilty of crucifying Jesus. Jesus and his disciples are presented as different and separate from the Jews. The Gospels often generally refer to the Jews and not to any specific one. The Gospels establish the association of Jews with the devil, and keep in mind that just in the Gospels and Acts of the Apostles, there are about 450 anti-Semitic verses, which amounts to an average of 2 per page. The Church Fathers, who laid the foundation of Christianity as we know it today, wrote things like the following, and I quote, "The synagogue is not only a whorehouse and a theater, it is also a den of thieves and a haunt of wild animals. No better disposed than pigs or goats, the Jews live by the rules of debauchery and inordinate gluttony. Only one thing they understand, to gorge themselves and get drunk." This was said by Saint John Chrysostom, who was the Bishop of Antioch in 386 of the Common Era. Here's another quote. "The Jews are the most worthless of all men. They are lecherous, greedy, rapacious. They are perfidious murderers of Christ. They worship the devil. Their religion is a sickness. Jews are the odious assassins of Christ, and for killing God there is no expiation possible, no indulgence or pardon. Christians may never cease vengeance, and the Jews must live in servitude forever. God always hated the Jews. It is essential that all Christians hate them." This was also said by a saint. St. Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, in the year 374 of the Common Era. In the year 1095, gangs of people led by adventurers, ex-priests, and inferior monks went on the first of several crusades to liberate the Holy Land from the Saracens. The first crusade was launched by Pope Urban II. The cross on which Jesus died provided the name and ideology to the events. Thinking of the crucifixion led Christians to seek vengeance from those who they believed were responsible for it. The Crusaders declared in clear anti-Jewish theology, and I quote, "You are the children of those who killed our object of veneration, hanging him from a tree." And he himself said, there will yet come a day when my children will come and avenge my blood. We are his children, and it is therefore obligatory for us to avenge him, since you are the ones who rebel and disbelieve him. Godfrey of Bouillon, who led the first crusade, swore to, and I quote, "avenge the blood of Christ on Israel, and to leave no single member of the Jewish race alive." As the mob fell upon the Jews of Rouen, Metz, and the Rhineland in Germany, with the war cry, "Baptism or death," they murdered tens of thousands of Jews, even eliminating entire communities. As the first Crusaders stampede trampled on Jews in the 11th century, they did so on what they imagined Jews to be, and not what they actually were. Keep in mind, most Christians in Europe never even saw a Jew because there were so few of them. This imaginary picture of Jews was the result of the portrayal of Jews still murdering Jesus in Jerusalem in the permanent present tense of the liturgy, repeated year after year. We see in this illustration from a 13th century French Bible, Crusaders killing Jews, which are identifiable by their yellow conical hats. The Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 decreed that Jews were to live in confined quarters and wear distinctive clothing. By 1555, Pope Paul IV articulated these and other restrictions and enforced them forcefully. Never before had such language been officially promulgated by a pope. He decreed that a walled quarter, which is to say a ghetto, had to be erected in every city in which all Jews were to live, segregated from their Christian community. Jews were to have just one synagogue, and they were banned from constructing others, and any other ones already built were to be demolished. Jews could not own any buildings, and they were forced to sell to Christians any properties they may have already owned. Jews were prohibited from having nurses, housekeepers, or any other Christian servants. Jews were prohibited from playing, eating, or fraternizing with Christians. Jews were not allowed to be addressed as superiors, even by poor Christians. Jews were not allowed to rent houses or businesses outside of a ghetto unless they had special permission from the cardinal vicar. Jews could not acquire real estate outside of a ghetto. Jews could not pursue higher education. Jews were prohibited from holding office. Jews were prohibited from being lawyers, druggists, notaries, painters, and architects. Physicians among them were prohibited from attending to or taking care of Christians. The latter would continue to be in place until the 17th century, when the clergy of Württemberg would still say, and I quote, "It is better to die with Christ than to be cured by a Jew doctor aided by the devil." This anti-Jewish papal bull is very important because both the language and the content are an almost literal antecedent to the anti-Jewish legislation that the Germans, the French, and Italians passed in the 1930s. The 1860 photograph that we see on the left here shows a typical narrow street in the confined, dark, squalid Roman ghetto, literally across the Tiber River from the Vatican. The Roman ghetto was largely demolished and the Jews freed after the Italian secular authorities took over from the Vatican in the year 1870. The right photo shows one of the currently walled up gates to the ghetto. Of course, the Nazis, who were as eager to eliminate the Jews from their midst as their Christian predecessors, also established ghettos in most major cities where hundreds of thousands of Jews were confined and where many of them would die of starvation and illness. As Cardinal Edward Cassidy said many years after the war, and I quote, "The ghetto, which came into being in 1555 with a papal bull, became in Nazi Germany the antechamber of extermination." These are pictures of the Warsaw and Lodz ghettos in Poland. The sign at the entrance of the ghetto reads, and I quote, "Jewish residential area, entrance forbidden." The expulsions of the Jews from most of the European countries in which they lived marked the beginning of an attempt at elimination. These expulsions were theologically, racially, and economically driven. Typically, medieval kings would order the expulsion of Jews after having arrested them, despoiled them of their money and investments, and subsequently confiscated all their houses, fields, and other immovable property. In a pattern designated to enrich the crown, later the Jews would be readmitted to the country, and the cycle would start again sometime after that. We see on the left image the 1492 decree issued by Spain's Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, in which they proclaimed, and I quote, "We have been informed by inquisitors that the mingling of Jews with Christians leads to the worst evils. The Jews try their best to seduce the new Christians, persuading them to follow the law of Moses. In consequence, our holy Catholic faith is debased and humbled. We have thus arrived at the conclusion that the only efficacious means to put an end to this evil consists in the definitive breaking of all relations between Jews and Christians, and this can only be obtained by their expulsion from our kingdom." On the illustration on the right, we see the expulsion of the Jews from Frankfurt in August of 1614. Now, if the expulsions of the Jews from most of the European countries in which they lived marked the beginning of an attempt at elimination, the Germans' extermination of two-thirds of European Jewry concluded it. Here we see the Nazis deporting the Jews from the Frankfurt area in May of 1942 to the Majdanek and Sobibor death camps, where they were gassed immediately. During the Middle Ages, various Catholic councils and popes decreed that the Jews were an evil influence on Christians, and thus Christians needed to avoid them. The Church then established the ghettos, where Jews were segregated. They also mandated that Jews wore special clothing to distinguish them from Christians. Jewish women were forced to wear a yellow shawl, and men a yellow conical hat or a yellow badge on their chest. The conical hat was meant to resemble a horn, to further strengthen the association of the Jew with the devil. By the time the Nazis came to power, in 1933, they found that they had little left to invent in their campaign against the Jews. The German anti-Jewish laws, the ghettos, the position of the distinguishing mark in their clothing had all been previously established by the Church. We see on the left a Nazi propaganda poster depicting a stereotypical Jew wearing the yellow Star of David. The text reads, "He is guilty for the war." And of course, on the right is the yellow Star of David that Jews were forced to attach to the clothes. A form of particularly offensive slander common in Christian Europe was the depiction of Jews allegedly performing obscene acts with a pig, as seen in this Judensaal engravings from the early 17th century. Judensaal is German for Jewish soul. These illustrations and sculptures were commonly found everywhere in Europe, including in cathedrals. In these illustrations, we see a horned devil himself wearing a medieval Jewish badge, encouraging Jewish men also wearing Jewish clothes and insignia to pleasure themselves with a soul and eat its excrement while a Jewish child sucks its teats. Also, a Jewish woman rides a goat, another symbol of the devil. On the left, we see the Cologne Cathedral in Germany in 1937. there is a Jugendsal in the underside of a choir stall seat in the cathedral, which is probably the earliest example. On the right, we see a Jugendsal sculpture outside of Wittenberg Cathedral, where Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses in 1517, launching the Protestant movement. Luther would later write, among much other viciously anti-Semitic things, and I quote, "Know, my dear Christian, and do not doubt that next to the devil, you have no enemy more cruel, more venomous, and virulent than the true Jew." In 1144, in Norwich, in England, a new notorious allegation was concocted accusing Jews of ritually murdering Christian boys to obtain blood to make Passover bread. His blood libel spread like wildfire, and led to multiple instances of persecution and torture of Jews every time a Christian boy disappeared or his body was found. This accusation was related to the alleged murder lust of the Jews and their bloodthirstiness, based on the conception that Jews hated Christianity and humankind in general. This medieval illustration depicts a cabal of Jewish men extracting the blood of Christian boys. Here are two examples of the ritual murder accusation as reported by the anti-Semitic publication Der Stürmer during the Nazi era. On the left, we see the May 1939 edition with the headline "Ritual Murder," showing a reprint of the same medieval depiction of a purported ritual murder committed by the Jews. The May 1934 edition on the right, with the headline "Jewish Murder Plan Against Gentile Humanity Revealed," shows a contemporary edition of the same thing. These publications were wildly popular during the Nazi era and were very, very successful. Adolf Hitler was born and raised as a Catholic. As a young man, he wanted to become an advocate, although later in his life he became an atheist. As he was never excommunicated, he officially died as a Catholic as well. In May of 1945, after having learned of Hitler's death, Cardinal Bertram of Breslau ordered that, I quote, "a solemn requiem mass be held in commemoration of the Führer, so that the almighty son, Hitler, be admitted to paradise." By the time Hitler began his political career, he realized the importance of projecting an image of religiosity. In his public speeches, he made a point to establish a providential connection between him, his work, and God, as well as remark the religious support for his fight against the Jews. On the Nazi propaganda poster on the left, we see Hitler in religious imagery ordinary Germans could relate to and understand, mirroring the dove that descended on Jesus when John the Baptist baptized him. What appears to be an eagle hovers against the light of heaven or a messianic Hitler. On the right, we see Hitler praying at the end of a rally in Vienna. The understanding that Hitler was on a divine mission was generalized. Hermann Goering, Hitler's second in command, said in distinctly Christian terms, and I quote, "God gave a savior to the German people. We have faith, deep and unshakable faith, that he, Hitler, was sent to us by God to save Germany." And the Protestant German Christians group expressed, quote, "In the person of the Führer, we behold the one sent from God, who places Germany in the presence of the Lord of history." Hitler understood that to conquer the German masses, he would have to appear not only religious, but also friendly to the churches. He often praised them in public and appeared in or around churches. Hitler was well aware of the church's long anti-Jewish record. In a meeting with Bishop Berning and Monsignor Steinmann in April of 1933, he complained, and I quote, "I have been attacked because of my handling of the Jewish question. The Catholic Church considered the Jews pestilent for 1500 years, put them into ghettos, etc., because it recognized the Jews for what they were. In the epoch of liberalism, the danger was no longer recognized. I am moving back toward the time in which a 1500-year-old tradition was implemented. I do not set race over religion, but I recognize the representatives of this race as pestilent for the state and for the church, and perhaps I am thereby doing Christianity a great service for pushing him out of schools and public functions. The Catholic Church has expressed in modern times that Nazism was a neo-pagan movement and claimed that Nazi anti-Semitism had its roots outside Christianity. This is not so. Even though Nazism may have been a neo-pagan movement, the vast majority of its followers remained believing Christians. Christian anti-Judaism is the foundation on which Nazi anti-Semitism was built. Despite the Catholic Church's official line, the roots of Nazi anti-Semitism are indisputably inside Christianity. Under the Weimar Republic, before the Nazis came to power, organizations of every kind multiplied. New monasteries were built, new religion orders were founded, and new schools were established. As the historian Karl Bachem said in 1931, and I quote, "Never yet has a Catholic country possessed such a developed system of all conceivable Catholic associations as today's Catholic Germany." Close quote. This was just 2 years before the Nazis were elected to rule Germany. Despite neo-pagan claims and Nazi efforts to eliminate Christianity from Germany, as late as 1944, just 1 year before the conclusion of the war, only 3.5% of the population described themselves as neo-pagan. Despite all pressures to leave the church, even among the SS, almost a fourth remained in the Catholic Church. By 1940, over 95% of the German population were still tax-paying members of their respective Protestant or Catholic churches. In these pictures we see Nazi brown shirts, the SA, attending church. Church attendance was a common private and official practice during the Nazi era. In these photographs we see Nazis attending Berlin Cathedral to celebrate Hitler's birthday in 1933. Indisputably, Christianity was, before and during the war, a powerful common denominator that permeated German society at all levels, and the indelible identity that anchored the ordinary German. On the left image, we see a roadside cross, commonly found everywhere along roads in 1930s Germany. The accusation of deicide was fully incorporated in the Christian psyche by the time the Nazis came. The illustration on the right is from the German anti-Semitic children's book, The Poisonous Mushroom. As this German mother explains to her children in the caption of its illustration, I quote, "When you see a cross, then think of the horrible murder by the Jews on Golgotha." Even though the Vatican objected to certain aspects of Nazism and considered it a heresy, the German Catholic Church and the various German Protestant churches wholeheartedly embraced it. Until Hitler took power in 1933, the Catholic Church banned the faithful from joining the Nazi Party. Shortly after, the Vatican signed a concordat, a diplomatic agreement, with the Nazi regime. After that, the German Catholic Church lifted the ban, and millions of Catholic Germans joined the party in droves. Not even after it was clear what the Nazis stood for did the Church admonish the faithful to leave the party or refrain from following its immoral orders. Throughout the Nazi period, clerics from both the Catholic and Protestant churches showed support for Hitler and Nazi policies. They did this by regularly appearing with Nazis, by regularly admonishing the faithful to obey Hitler, by regularly praising Hitler and his policies, by regularly supporting the persecution of the Jews, and by providing material assistance in the hunt for Jews by providing the government with baptismal records, which allowed them to identify who was a Jew. Archbishop Grover from the German Catholic Church declared to an enthusiastic audience that he gave, and I quote, his complete and wholehearted support to the new government and the new Reich. Bishop Berning declared that German bishops not only accepted and recognized the new state, but served, and I quote, served it with ardent love and with all our strength. Cardinal Bertram addressed German Catholics in his diocese of Breslau in 1938, 3 years after the Nuremberg anti-Jewish laws had been passed. He invoked scriptures to support the Nazi regime. I quote, "There is no need to urge you to give respect and obedience to the new authorities of the German state. You all know the words of the apostle. Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities." Bishop Bornewasser of Trier exhibited the seamless robe as an exceptional show of support. The tunic had not been exhibited to the faithful since 1891. He declared to a congregation of Catholic youth in the Trier Cathedral that, quote, "With raised heads and firm step, we have entered the new Reich, and we are prepared to serve it with all the might of our body and soul." Bishop Hevelius declared in a letter written in April 1933 that he had been, quote, "always an anti-Semite. One cannot fail to appreciate that in all of the corrosive manifestations of modern civilization, Jewry plays a leading role." Even Dietrich Bonhoeffer from the Confessing Church also displayed theological anti-Judaism. I quote, "The state's measures against the Jewish people are connected in a very special way with the Church," he declared. "In the Church of Christ, we must never lose sight of the idea that the chosen people who nailed the Savior of the world to the cross must bear the curse of the action through a long history of suffering." Medieval Christian thinkers began asking themselves what kind of rational creature would deliberately reject the truth and kill God. They concluded that only someone who was an irrational and inhuman agent of Satan would act that way. As preposterous as this may sound to us today, in the medieval Christian mind, Jews were literally conceived of as inhuman demonic creatures that used Satan's weapons to fight the forces of truth and salvation. Christians familiar with biblical imagery, for example from John 8, where Jesus tells the Jews, quote, "You belong to your father, the devil," had no difficulty in accepting this. The conviction that the Jews work together with the devil explains how it was possible to accept a priori every accusation against Jews, regardless of how preposterous it was. On the left, we see a detail from a 1475 German anti-Semitic painting portraying the devil wearing a Jewish badge. On the right is the February 1943 edition of the anti-Semitic publication Der Stürmer. The caption to the photograph of a stereotypical Eastern European Jew reads, "Satan." At the bottom of the page is the ubiquitous Nazi slogan, "The Jews are our misfortune," which echoes Martin Luther's, and I quote, "The Jews are for us a heavy burden, the calamity of our being. They are like a plague, pestilence, pure misfortune for our country." The association of the Jews with the devil, which had been pervasive in Christendom for centuries, found expression on many outlets during the Nazi period. The Nazi propaganda machine spoke to the German people in familiar language that they understood and that they easily related to. The photograph on the left is from a roadside warning sign found in Germany during the Third Reich. It reads, "Jews in the Blosserberg community are not welcome. To know the Jew is to know the devil." The photograph in the center shows a sign in the countryside in Eschenbach in central Franconia, Germany, in July 1935, which reads, "The father of the Jews is the devil." In smaller type, below it you can read, "Jesus Christ." What were these children supposed to think? The photograph on the right shows an anti-Jewish sign posted on a street in Dresden, also in Germany. It reads, "The Jews are the children of the devil." Below the large sign are two smaller ones that read, "The Jews are our misfortune." Anti-Semitism in Germany was also directed specifically to children. Like the propaganda aimed at adults, the use of language with a religious tenor in magazines, billboards, and books was critical to clearly impress the tender reader's mind. For example, the notorious anti-Semite Judith Streicher said in a speech, and I quote, "Without a solution to the Jewish question, there will be no salvation for mankind." Both of the illustrations we see here are from the children's book, The Poisonous Mushroom. The one on the left shows a billboard announcing a talk by Streicher. It tells German children that Jews are our misfortune, and that those who are fighting against the Jews are struggling with the devil. At a real-life New River gathering during Christmas 1936, Streicher addressed 2,000 children. "Do you know who the devil is?" he asked his breathlessly listening audience. The Jew, replied 2,000 children's voices. Another story in The Poisonous Mushroom tells of a German girl who is waiting to be examined by a Jewish doctor. Her eyes stare into the face of the Jewish doctor, and his face is the face of the devil. In the middle of this devil's face is a huge crooked nose. Behind the spectacles, 2 criminal eyes, and the thick lips are grinning, a grinning that expresses, "Now I've got you at last, you little German girl." The children learning these things in the 1930s were the young soldiers, SS, policemen, or local auxiliaries who willingly and eagerly denounced, hunted down, tortured, and murdered Jews in the 1940s. How else could they have acted? Who would not eagerly kill the devil? The Holocaust forces us to answer some tough questions. What motivated the perpetrators to so willingly round up, deport, and slaughter thousands of people in the most hellish way? Why was it that they did not excuse themselves from this task when their commanders gave them the choice, and when there was no consequence in doing so? Why was it that they willingly took pictures of themselves and their victims to share with their friends and families back home? The picture on the right is an example of the latter. These are not the actions of reluctant functionaries blindly following orders. The willingness, and in most cases eagerness, to exterminate Jews, and to do so in the ways they did, was predicated on the basis of a profound, visceral hatred towards Jews instilled in them almost from the moment that they could understand language. A hatred that went much deeper than the racial propaganda of the day. The Germans and their helpers went far beyond because they felt the Jews were guilty of monstrous crimes and were dangerous. They exterminated Jews because they felt they were defending themselves from what they perceived to be a demonic influence on their Christian way of life. The perpetrators inflicted unspeakable pain and suffering on their victims, and then they killed them because, aside from the racial hatred that made them think that they were eliminating a subhuman species, they were taking revenge for allegedly causing capitalism, communism, revolution, for the defeat in World War I, for unemployment, for economic depression, for taking the best jobs, and for any number of baseless accusations, all successors to modern guise and language, to the accusations of ritual murder, causing the Black Plague, association with the devil, poisoning wells, desecrating the host, rejecting Christian revelation, defiling the Christian mind, and of killing Christ. Did the priests assigned to the German armed forces admonish the faithful to refrain from murdering Jews, as that was a crime, a mortal sin? No, they didn't. Instead, they provided group absolution and succor to soldiers. Catholic military Bishop Rakowski was the spiritual leader of the priests assigned to the German armed forces. Did he instruct his priests to admonish the faithful to refrain from murdering Jews, as that was a crime and a mortal sin? No. Instead, he blamed the Jews for the war and all of Germany's misfortunes, and instructed the priests to admonish the flock to blindly follow orders, reminding them that, and I quote, "Behind all this stands God himself, and with his will and command," close quote, and telling them that they should obey the Führer, quote, "out of holiest conviction of conscience." Sometimes the sermons from regular priests were quite explicit. For example, on a Sunday sermon in May 1942 to Kowal in Poland, the priest gave clear guidance to his flock, and I quote, "No trace of a Jew is to remain. We should erase them from the face of the earth." Again, this was a sermon in church. As is to be expected, this led the perpetrators of the Holocaust to think that they were doing the right thing and that it was God's will. As a daily and constant reminder, their belt buckles had the inscription, "God with us," stamped on it. We can see this on the upper left image in this page. The photograph on the lower left shows a religious service for German soldiers. The photographs on the right show the military chaplains assigned to the special units who went behind the army on the Eastern Front and whose responsibility was to round up and shoot all the Jews in every town along the front. The men we saw murdering the mother and child and the naked women in the ravine on the previous page came from units like this one. The upper right photograph shows the machine gun used by the unit to murder Jews lined up on the edge of a mass grave. The lower right photo shows the military chaplain before or after his religious service cleansing the souls of these men. The Nuremberg trial set the legal precedent of accusing someone of incitement and of using hateful speech. But if Julius Streicher, the publisher of Der Stürmer, was accused of leading the education of the German people in perverse ways, of concentrating on the youth and childhood of Germany, of injecting the poison of hate in the minds of millions of people, so could the church. However, in this picture of the trial of major war criminals, emblematic of justice, we do not see any cleric who may have been guilty of committing crimes before, during, or after the war. Had it not been for the Stürmer and its publisher, German fascism would not have been able to educate in such short period of time those mass murderers who put into effect the criminal plans of Hitler and his thugs by murdering almost 6 million European Jews. And had it not been for Christianity's teachings about Jews, there would not have been a Stürmer, a Streicher, or a Hitler. Bishop Angelo Roncalli, who had fought tirelessly to save Jews during the war, became Pope John XXIII after the wartime Pope Pius XII died in 1958. John XXIII removed the term perfidious Jews from the Good Friday prayer and subsequently renounced all negative references to Jews, such as allusions to their veiled hearts and blindness. In 1962, almost 20 years after the Holocaust, he convened the Second Vatican Council. The result was the Nostra Aetate Declaration, which stated that the crucifixion, and I quote, cannot be blamed upon all the Jews then living without distinction, nor upon the Jews of today. In addition to this, the fathers declared that the Jews are not repudiated or cursed by God. These statements marked the beginning of the end of over 1,600 years of Christian anti-Semitism. The Catholic Church, followed shortly afterwards by the Protestant Church, issued instruction to priests on how to teach and discuss Judaism with the faithful. In 1998, after 11 years in the making, and more than half a century after the Holocaust, the Vatican, under Pope John Paul II, issued the statement, "We remember, a reflection on the Shoah," which is Hebrew for Holocaust. This was a well-intentioned document, but it fell short of being absolutely truthful. Moreover, the document was simply too little, too late. It was mostly a defensive apologetic attempt to exonerate the Church. In contrast, The American Catholic bishops were more forthright, and I quote, "Christian anti-Judaism did lay the groundwork for racial, genocidal anti-Semitism by stigmatizing not only Judaism but Jews themselves for opprobrium and contempt. So, the Nazi theories tragically found fertile soil in which to plant the horror of an unprecedented attempt at genocide. We remember's call for the Church's ongoing repentance for the sins against the Jews will involve for most Christians an assumption of responsibility for our collective Christian past, not personal guilt. The Church had every reason to assume responsibility to ensure that nothing like it ever happened again." Thank you very much. Those of you that want to see more information about this topic, you can check the website 6millioncrucifixions.com. Of course, I would be honored if you read the book. We have some for sale here. I'll be happy to sell them for you if you wish. And I'd be always willing to receive your comments at any time. You can contact me through my website if you want to write to me with your thoughts or impressions on the book or the talk. I'd be glad to hear from you.